Hello, welcome to the Myth-Busting Neurodiverse Relationships podcast. I'm Natalie Roberts and I'm here with my co-host, Heather Parks. We've both been in our neurodiverse relationships and families for more than 25 years. We met 10 years ago when we were feeling really desperate and trying to solve a lot of issues in our relationship and our families. We've been journeying since then. We've found many more positive and hopeful ways to solve, resolve, repair, reconnect in those relationships and in our families, in our lives. And we now co-host also Loving Difference online, giving hope and a way forward for neurodiverse relationships. In this podcast, though, we're busting the myths about neurodiverse relationships, which we had when we started this journey, that we've realized aren't true, and that actually were preventing us from recovering and having the relationships with our partners and children that we wanted. So we want to dispel these myths and bring you hope that absolutely things can change. So whether you're out and about or comfy with a cuppa, let's dive into our next conversation. See you there.
Hello, Natalie here. Today's episode is Heather's presentation at the online Neurodiverse Love conference in February 2023. Heather's busting the myth that things will only get better if your partner changes or if you change even more than you have already in your neurodiverse relationship. Heather and I want you to know the new truth that it takes two to create a pattern and only one to change it. You can change your experience of the relationship by focusing on yourself. So listen or watch along to find out more, and pop back to the previous episode to hear my presentation if you've not heard or watched it yet. We used slides in the presentation, so some things may be a little tricky to make sense of. So if you're listening to the podcast, you can watch instead via our Loving Difference YouTube channel, or even better, come and join us at our online home in Loving Difference. Enjoy!
I'm so excited to be here and to be part of these important conversations about neurodiverse relationships. The fact that we're having this conference brings me so much hope that in the future, people will have better understanding and more acceptance of differences, and that this will create new ways to be in neurodiverse relationships right from the start. I'm sure that the conversations we're having now will mean that there'll be lots of celebration of living and loving well with difference in the future. I believe that there are already happy neurodiverse relationships out there. However, it's those who are struggling who are more likely to seek support from professionals and support groups like those offered by Neurodiverse Love. And if you're amongst those people who are struggling in your neurodiverse relationship right now, I'd love to bring you the hope and inspiration that things can change, and to let you know that it's possible to have a better experience in your neurodiverse relationships. And I know because I've done it and I've supported others to do it too. So as Mona said, I'm Heather Parks and I've been in a neurodiverse relationship for over 25 years. An accredited coach and mentor with my own personal experience of living and loving with difference. And it's both an honour and a privilege to guide other neurodiverse families to find their own path and rhythm so that they can embrace their authentic selves and be happier, healthier, and more connected in their relationships. So today I'm looking forward to sharing something that was greatly significant for me in my journey. And if I say anything in the next 15 minutes-ish that sparks some curiosity, you can begin your own journey right now by joining me and neurodiverse relationship coach Natalie Roberts in Revival Retreat. We created Revival Retreat so that anyone, anywhere could access professional support and community in one place. And we're going to start some slides. So let's get started. And what I'd love to share with you today is how my understanding of my own defence modes helped me to interrupt the defence cycle which we were entrenched in as a family system. This defence cycle kept us stuck in a pretty horrible place before I found the key to unlocking the cycle for myself and interrupting the wider cycle that I was part of. If you're feeling stuck and things are challenging in your neurodiverse relationship or family, I hope you'll find my story encouraging and that you're inspired to get the support you need to find your way to shift out of defense mode. When we can shift out of defense mode, it's as if we're changing the lens through which we're seeing our situation. New perspectives open up. We can find creative solutions and we can take courageous actions for ourselves that can in turn and in time facilitate change for others. We absolutely love to bust myths about neurodiverse relationships. And I'm hoping that by the end of this talk, I will have busted this one, that things can only get better if my partner changes or if I change myself even more than I have already. Now, I know that this felt true for me. And if you're feeling stuck and your partner isn't ready or able to make changes, I'd like to offer another way forward. One that doesn't involve cajoling, persuading, begging, presenting ultimatums, or any of the other things which we can do when we're feeling desperate, helpless, and exhausted. And I promise it doesn't involve changing you more either. And it's incredibly empowering and exciting to know that we can take agency and create change without waiting for someone else to be ready. As Esther Perel says, it takes two to create a pattern, but only one to change it. We can interrupt the defense cycle, create a different experience, even if our partners aren't on the same page. So let's go on to the next slide here, which shows the root cause. Adaptive strategies or defense modes, terms which I use interchangeably in this talk to refer to the ways we adapt to survive long-term stress and traumatic events. So defense modes or adaptive strategies are behaviours which stem from our autonomic nervous system's response to a threat or perceived threat. The autonomic nervous system creates physiological changes in our body which influence the way we react to our external environment, to other people, and to even our internal world. The purpose of these defences is to get our body ready to respond in whatever way will maximise our chances of survival. So traditionally, when we think of this, we picture a caveman running away from or fighting a saber-toothed tiger. In modern life, survival doesn't look like this. As a young child, survival might mean doing whatever we can to maintain attachment with a caregiver. As we get older, this may mean adapting ourselves so that we could fit in at school. Or in the case of a traumatic event, it could mean zoning out or disassociating to protect us from physical or emotional pain. So when our nervous systems repeatedly activate these defensive responses, they become reinforced until they become our patterns, the way we behave in order to try and get our needs met or to cope when they aren't being met. And we can also adopt a pattern of behaviour when traumatic events are not resolved or processed and the nervous system keeps re-triggering the same response even when danger has passed. Now, all of this happens way below our level of consciousness. And since we aren't aware of the reactions, we don't tend to notice or reflect or evaluate whether these behaviours are helpful or healthy for us. Rather, they can become habitual, so much so that they begin to feel like part of who we are. And we may see other people as their adaptive strategies too. And so often these patterns become really problematic in our relationships because they affect our outlook on life, our view of ourselves and of others, and we can become over or under responsive, or both, depending on which nervous system is engaged at any one time. Initially, I was looking at this information through the lens of this is what is happening to my children and partner. And my focus began with how can I get them out of defense mode? What was missing is that even that thought process, the view that the problem was over there and I could come in and fix it, was vital evidence that I was also operating from my own defense mode and from adaptive strategies learnt way before I even met my partner. So we're going to have a quick look at each of these defense modes. On the next 5 slides, I've tried to show that each of these adaptive strategies can present quite differently. And my invitation to you is to have a look at these adaptive strategies and see whether you can relate to any. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. So let's have a look at flight. So if someone had said to me, you're in flight mode, I would have denied it, I think. I would have said, I'm not someone who runs away or escapes. But actually, when we take a broader definition of flight mode, I do recognise these reactions in me, particularly the one about avoiding conflict or disagreement. Definitely the one about deciding I need to go on holiday and never come back, zoning out, internally escaping, and experiencing high levels of anxiety. And you may recognise some of these too. So if we go on to the next slide, which is fight. And fight and flight often go together, the reason being they both involve mobilisation and activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Again, I wouldn't describe myself as someone who gets into fight. I don't argue. I'm not someone who does that kind of behaviour. But when we start getting a bit more nuanced in what we can look like, well, it's another story. I've certainly been guilty of venting and offloading about my situation to friends rather than using honest and open communication to resolve my issues openly and calmly. And my absolute go-to is right there on the list. Passive aggressiveness, fueled by resentment, anger and frustration that I've stuffed down, and envy that others are getting something that I want for myself, like rest or connection or a meal cooked for them. Judging others, I'm far too nice for that, aren't I? But when we think or believe that others are not doing the best they can with whatever knowledge and capacity they have, we are judging them. So if we think our partners or children should be able to do things differently, I would invite you to consider that you might actually be sitting in this camp. Going on to freeze. I think of this as rabbits in the headlight state. Do I stay? Do I go? It's like having the gas pedal on and the brake on at the same time. We're burning through energy as the sympathetic nervous system activates us, driving us to mobilise. Oh, but at the same time, the dorsal vagal pathway is saying, stop. If you just don't move, they won't notice you. And sometimes we do literally freeze, unable to move or find our words, or perhaps we're sort of semi-functioning in that freeze zone, which makes us feel like life is just really hard. It can feel like your body and brain are just not working. Now, I remember feeling like I was moving through treacle rather than air. And then we have a look at friend. Now, this is one we just see so often. We're not using fight, we're not using flight. Maybe those just didn't seem safe or appropriate to our situation. So we friend. It's often a developed strategy we develop as a young person to ensure that we have the connection we need. So we learn to put others' needs above our own. We befriend, placate, fawn, and try and minimise our risk of threat by keeping others happy. This was my go-to defence mode. And I didn't recognise it as such. I just actually thought I was a very nice person who liked to help people. But actually, I was missing a lot of these signs. I felt like a chameleon, changing my colours to suit others, to fit in, ignoring my own instincts, going along with others' plans. I struggled with personal boundaries and meeting my own needs. I felt an urge to help others. Read into that, fix others. Offering solutions without consent and needing to be needed. My being okay depended on others being okay, so I worked towards that. And that's largely where I ended up in the next one. Collapse. burnt out, exhausted, depressed, numb, experiencing constant nausea, headaches, brain fog. This is our way of dealing with traumatic events to protect ourselves from physical and emotional pain, or simply because we've been in the other defensive states for so long that our body can no longer sustain it. In its extreme, we may faint or experience memory loss or feel like it's happening to somebody else. So we're going to have a look at the next slide, the defense cycle. And I've put up there that this is for all neurotypes. It's particularly relevant in neurodiverse relationships. Why is that? Well, firstly, I believe it's highly likely that a neurodivergent person will have experienced more stress from a lack of validation, sensory overload, and from being misunderstood. This creates long-term trauma effect, even before we add in anything else. All neurotypes are prone to defense modes, and that means both of us can be in defense. And I believe it is so crucial in our relationships because it impacts all the other building blocks of a healthy relationship. It impacts the way we communicate, our ability to hold healthy boundaries, our ability to trust ourselves and trust others. And it impacts our health and well-being. And these things in turn impact our ability to take action and to make decisions about the things that matter to us. So when we look at this cycle then, we have these unmet needs or traumatic events which activate our defense mechanisms. And then ideally we recover and they get switched off. No cycle. But what tends to happen is that stress or unresolved trauma keeps activating the defense mechanisms and they aren't switched off. Our bodies then have to work harder to ensure all our normal functions stay within reasonable limits. For example, our heart rate, it can get faster when we're doing fight flight, but something's got to dampen that down. Otherwise it will just keep going up and up and up, and we can only tolerate a certain window. And this causes wear and tear on the body, which is referred to as allostatic load. And when we're operating with allostatic load, our capacity to deal with everyday stresses is reduced, which means it takes even less and less to reactivate the defense mechanisms, which further enforce our adaptive strategies and so on. And our defense cycles can feed into other people's too. So one angry person tends to trigger another person into defense mode, which triggers them higher into defense mode. It just can go on. I can watch this with my own children. I get into that pattern with them too if I'm not careful. We fuel each other's stress and reinforce each other's adaptive patterns. So in my case, that's 6 nervous systems ending up in defense mode. So let's look at how we can interrupt the cycle. My encouragement, my invitation is that you start with you. You start to notice the patterns. You get curious. Who am I underneath all these layers of defensive behavior? Get clear about when your behavior is defense-led. Get to know how you are in each of the defense modes. What is your default one? What feeds your cycle? How do you behave in it? I promised that this wouldn't be about changing you more, because this is actually about rediscovery. Who are you underneath all those layers? And as we become more aware of our patterns, we can start practices that calm our nervous system, and we can begin to create more space between the triggers and our reaction. We start to be able to interrupt, to catch those defense modes before it's too late. We can breathe and we can respond from choice. And this helps prevent us from feeding the defense modes of others. Thirdly, and very importantly, we need to prioritize ourselves. We've got to help our nervous systems to recover, to reduce the stress, to reduce that allostatic load on our systems and return to a state of well-being. We need to reconnect with ourselves so that we can reconnect with others. And just going on to the next slide, this is where I encourage you, fourthly, to get support. We all need support for this work. For many of us who are struggling in our neurodiverse relationships, the reality is that we are trying to get out of defense mode in a situation where many of us are still experiencing stress. I believe really passionately that you need some professional support and support from others who are doing this work alongside you, especially if you aren't getting encouragement and celebration of your progress from home. And we've created it because we feel that we've found the ways to recover and to feel alive again. And we want to share that with you. So finally, just onto the last slide, please do accept our invitation. This is how we start to have a different experience, a better experience, a healthier, a happier one. And you deserve this. And of course, I am anticipating a big but. And that's, but what about the relationship? We can't shift somebody else out of defense mode unless we are ourselves able to stay out of defense mode, at least most of the time. And the things that get us out of defense mode may not be the same as what gets your partner or your child out of defense mode. We can go down our path, but that might not be the right path or the right pace or the right time for somebody else. So if your question is, how can I get my partner or child to ... I'd love to work with you, and you first. And I invite you to test and see. Who knows what will happen next? My experience was that there was a ripple effect. When I was out of defense mode and fully recovered, I was able to create safety for others in our connection, in our communication, and in our emotional and sensory experiences.
If this episode has resonated with you, subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching to get notifications of future episodes. To dive deeper into all of this with professional coaching, resources, and all the support you need, join us in Love Indifference via www.loveindifference.net. And we'll be back here soon.